Alright, so we're going to do a couple of examples here of sketching polynomial functions just based on the function that we're given. So we're going to start with the function f of x is equal to x minus 1 times x plus 2 times x. And in order to sketch the function, we need to know two things. We need to know what the degree is, and we need to know what the roots are. And so I'm going to give you a second, pause the video, decide what the degree of the polynomial is and what the roots are. Alright, so hopefully you went through and you realized if I were to multiply this out, I'm going to get a cubic polynomial, and it's going to have a positive coefficient, right? I'm not going to have a negative sign out front. And why is that important? Well, the reason it's important is because it tells us the basic shape of our graph. Right? It's going to serpentine, just like that. And now that we know the basic shape, all that's left for us to do is pick our roots and use those two things in combination to sketch our graph. So I want you to pause again, find the roots, make sure you know why those are the roots, and then press play. So the first root you should see, if we look at the first factor, is going to be 1. And the first root is 1. Why is that? Well, if I were to plug in 1, this whole factor, x minus 1, would be 0. So I would have 0 times 3 times 1. And that will be 0. So that's going to be a root. So I have one add 1. All right, the next root that I'm going to get is when x equals, make sure this is the roots, is when x equals negative 2. Because if I were to plug in negative 2 into my second factor, right, if I had negative 2, well, this is going to go to 0, this is going to be negative 3, and this is going to be negative 2, but anything times 0 is 0, so at negative 2, I'm going to have a root. So I have one root here and one root here. Now, some of us might stop there, but we need to realize that this is going to have a certain number of roots. How many roots will a cubic function have to have? Well, there are actually going to be 3 factors. Since there are 3 factors, there are 3 different things that could go to 0, which would make this entire function equal 0. And this last one here, this x value, might even think of it as x plus 0. Well, what will I have to plug into that in order to make my whole function 0? And the answer is 0. So my last root is going to be at 0. Okay? And so I can put these facts together. I can take the basic shape and I can take the roots and use that to sketch my graph. I know I've got to start down below in the negative numbers because a cubic function is going to move upwards from left to right. It's going to have to intersect the x-axis at negative 2. Then I've got to intersect the x-axis again at 0. And remember, I've got to end up moving upwards, so it's going to then dip down below and move up. All right? We're going to go into more detail tomorrow about the specifics of what's happening at the roots, but for now, that is a really good sketch. Let's move on to the second one. So once again, I want you to pause. I want you to figure out that, what is the basic shape, what are the roots, and I want you to actually give it a try yourself so that then you can correct your work. All right, hopefully that went well. So the first thing I want to decide is what is the degree of this polynomial? What type of a polynomial is it going to be? And since I have 4 factors, when I multiply them all out, I'm going to end up with a x to the 4th as my largest term. And so it's going to be a 4th degree polynomial, or a quartic function, and we know that the leading coefficient is positive, right, because it's x times x times x times x, which is going to be a positive x to the 4th. And so it's going to look like that. Next, I want to decide on my roots. The roots that I get are going to be negative 2, that's from the first factor, negative 1, that's from the second factor, positive 2, that's from the third factor, and negative 3, that's from the last factor. So now that I have all the roots, I can go ahead and start sketching my graph. So I'm just going to mark where the roots are. I have one at -1, one at -2, I have one at +2, and another one at -3. And we know the basic shape, right? I've got to be moving upwards on each side. The end behavior is the same. So I'm going to come through, I'm going to cross the x-axis here, move up, cross the x-axis there, back down, crossing it again, and finally swooping back up, just like that. And that's, of course, a 4th degree polynomial given by that function. I hope that was helpful.